Hi, everyone. So, today we're going to be talking about culture. So, there's no denying how important culture is to many of us, to all of us actually. It connects us to other people and really makes us feel like we belong. But it also influences the way we perceive relationships, how we show up in relationships, and the behaviors we accept as normal in our relationships. So, today, in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we're talking with an incredible member of our team, of our community, I should say. She's a contributor to our blog and general One Love supporter. We're going to be speaking to her about her Hispanic heritage and how she feels like it has influenced the way she shows up in relationships and perceives healthy ones. So without further ado, we're going to invite her on. Hi, everyone. My name is Jaleesa. For those of you who are new around here, I'm One Love social media manager, and my preferred pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to be waving at a lot of you guys as Natasha. Thank you guys for joining. Let's try and get. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Jaleesa. How are
How
you?
are you? Can you hear me clearly? Is everything good with the audio?
Everything's good so
Awesome.
far. So hopefully it stays like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also like, I have like, I'm praying that my heat doesn't come on while we're talking because it does the loud clicking sound
Oh
that I
yeah,
cannot stand
I'm
during
familiar.
lives.
Hmm.
Sounds familiar to you too?
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
a New York moment right there.
Yeah, classic, classic, classic New York, and for me right now, New Jersey area as well. But
Yeah.
I'm excited to get into this conversation about culture and your culture and the way it influences your relationships, as all culture in society does. But first, I would love for you to just briefly introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Natasha Barraque, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and right now I'm living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Um, my connection with One Love actually happened shortly after I left what I considered to be a toxic relationship for myself. And I ended up just finding this video on YouTube with your CEO, Katie. And she was illustrating the differences between healthy and unhealthy relationships and just the mission behind One Love to teach what a healthy relationship is to young adults hit me so profoundly, especially at that point in my life, because I was like, wow, I really wish someone would have taught me this. Maybe I could have avoided a lot of mistakes. Um, so, long story short, I ended up trying to get an interview for being a part of their writers program. So, luckily, I got accepted, and I've been able to contribute some pieces to your blog and the resources. So, it's been a very cool experience.
Yeah,
And I love being in a community that's like-minded and that we all really find what we're doing important. So,
absolutely. And I think we're a passionate bunch here at One Love internally, and that definitely translates externally as well. But let's
yeah,
get into this conversation.
let's do it.
Yeah, talk to us about your cultural identity. How do you see yourself? How do you identify?
So I will say that this is kind of ever evolving for me. I do think that I didn't start really getting into this idea of what is my cultural identity until maybe a few years ago. I Everyone kind of growing up in Miami could probably relate to me, but growing up in Miami, it's so Latin oriented that you never feel like a minority because we are the majority. Um, so it wasn't really until I left home and started living in other places where I was considered a minority that I started realizing, okay, this is really interesting. I don't necessarily fit in here like I fit in at home. And then when I started traveling to Latin American countries, I didn't exactly fit in there either. So I consider myself Latin American. I say Latin and not Cuban American because I'm a mix. My dad is Cuban and my mom is from Nicaragua. So I'm definitely a mix of Hispanic descent. I grew up in a Latin household. But I was born in the States. And so I'm very even in the middle with both of those cultures. And it's been an interesting journey kind of figuring out what that means to me.
Awesome. And now the $1 million question, which might
Mm.
warrant a two-part response, but how do you feel like your culture, this Latin American culture has influenced the way you see relationships and the way you show up in them?
Yeah. So I think I'll start by answering kind of how I was raised a little bit, just overview. Um, Being raised, my household was very Latin. We kept our traditions. My parents spoke to me in Spanish. I lived with my grandmother, who did not speak any English at all. Um, so I always felt very Latin, again, until I left home, where I started realizing I was a little bit half and half.
Yeah.
That being said, both of my parents came to the States because number one, my dad was fleeing Castro, the revolution, and my mom left Nicaragua initially because of a war. So this is a very common theme in Central and South American countries. There's a lot of political oppression. There's a lot of dictatorship, war. I mean, there's so many socioeconomic issues that exist within these countries that I think any child of anyone who's immigrated to the US can relate, that there is a bit of a survival mentality when we're growing up. And what I mean by that is my parents had to come here, they had to struggle in the US to build what they got. We didn't have the worst situation by far. But it's still the survival mindset of if I stop and if I'm not perfect, I'm going to lose everything. And I think that's passed. If you don't heal that, that obviously passes on to your children. You kind of raise them to be, these luchadores, I'm going to call it. That's very similar to like someone who goes and fights and survives. So I grew up with this survival mindset, and I think that I didn't realize how that was affecting my relationships until my previous relationship, where it started showing up a lot. I realized that anytime a problem would come up, the only thing that I knew how to do was either fight or flight. Those were my only two options. No other options existed for me. I wasn't educated on that. I didn't see that growing up. It was very much like, okay, there's an issue, we got to fight. And that's the only option pretty much, because even if you're fleeing the country to go and fight for your rights somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely something that I grew up with. I think also seeing my parents work so hard while I was growing up gave me I think I internalized it as I need to be as hardworking as them and as perfect as I saw that they were. So that kind of internalized for me as like a very strong sense of perfectionism. Once I left Miami as well, being considered a minority, I really did feel like I had to work harder than every single person around me. I got a lot of great validation for that, in my career. But when it came to relationships, I found that I held people to such a high standard and myself to such a high standard that I didn't exactly create space for mistakes to be okay. And that's something I've had to dismantle and look at now. So those are just a few ways that how my culture has influenced my relationship so far. And I can talk about that for 5 hours. So
it's a beautiful way to explain how the macro really does influence the micro.
yeah.
And so how these bigger things that happen that seem so outside of ourselves, like your parents either having the choice to stay and fight in their country or leave, how it actually shows up as relationship behaviors in your life today, even though it wasn't a choice that you had to make yourself personally.
Right.
Really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So something I wanted to ask is, because we inherit a lot from our family, our friends, and just society as a whole. And some of them are like really incredible values, and some of them are like not so incredible, right? So, and the same goes for relationships. So I'm wondering what unhealthy relationship behaviors, were normalized in your household growing up. or in your culture in general?
Yeah. Um, I think first I want to say that so many people that are functioning off survival mode, this is directly linked to anxiety. If you think about it, in evolution, survival mode is you're either fighting for your life or you're running away for your life. Um, so there's a lot of anxiety embedded in the Hispanic culture that isn't really dealt with, and it's not looked at, and it's really pushed under the rug. Um, this can show up as a big lack of boundaries. I think this is something I've personally experienced and talked with many people about who are in a similar, cultural background as I am. Um, I think lack of boundaries comes from trying to control and trying to protect, especially when it comes from your parents, the parents to the kids. There isn't really strong boundaries put in place. They don't really know what it is. I didn't know what it was until very recently. You and I have talked about that separately, and the intensity that comes with the lack of boundaries and with the love. I've noticed in the Hispanic culture, a lot of love is shown through self-sacrifice. And I think that's directly tied to, if your parents immigrated here, they didn't have it easy, most likely. When they came here, they had to work for every single thing that they got. Every cent that they got, they had to work really hard for. I saw my parents sacrifice so much for my sister and I just to put us into a good education, to help us move forward, to help us have more than they had. Um, but I think I internalized that as like, okay, that's love, and that's the only thing I know love to be. So again, for me in relationships, when it came to me being in a relationship, the only way I knew how to show love was through self-sacrifice. And that damaged me in ways that were very painful. But it was a lesson learned. I had to learn healthier ways of exploring love, how to honor my boundaries, figure out what they were, and also how to respect someone else's boundaries. And through learning this, I've also been trying to implement this type of thinking within my family, which has been a challenge of its own because, again, the mental health education isn't really there for a lot of Hispanic families that have immigrated to the US. So,
100%.
yeah.
Just want to shout out some One Love friends that are joining us today. Thank you so much, One Love team, for joining the live, even if you can't stay the entire time, right? Good
Yes.
job, team. But I
Great
did want
job.
to just ask, so you said self-sacrifice. That's one of the things you used to do to show love, and that's something that you learned was the way you showed love from your family. I'm wondering, did you expect that in return? Was that a behavior like if someone shows me, in order to show me they love me, they have to be self-sacrificing or else they don't?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I put so many expectations on people, and I didn't do it with a bad intention, but it's
Right.
just what it was. And
Yeah.
yeah, if someone wasn't doing the most for me, I was like, oh, you don't care. You don't care. And I was doing the most for them. So, of course, you want to love that's even. But the
Mm-hmm.
way that I was loving was kind of reckless. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know any better. So that's why I think it's so important to understand what boundaries are and how to implement them and what yours are,
Mm-hmm.
and draw that line and not cross it.
100%. So, as you're learning and shifting your behaviors to healthier behaviors, were there any struggles involved in that journey?
Yeah. So I'll say that I do want to say that the majority of my the weird part is that these kind of struggles only show up for me in romantic relationships for a reason that I'm still trying to figure out because my friendships are like the best relationships I've ever had.
Beautiful.
They're thriving.
I love
um,
that.
yeah. But I will say that primarily in the past, I have dated people that had similar culture to me. So I did find it interesting that all of my behaviors were very normalized. Like no one ever really called me out on it. I didn't really call people out on what they were giving to me either, because we had normalized it within our culture. So it really wasn't until I started dating outside of my own culture and seeing someone else's reaction of my normal behaviors and the way that they were like, that doesn't, that doesn't seem very okay. Luckily, I was open-minded enough to be like, let me think about that, because if I wasn't, I would have gotten defensive and that would have been it. But that's kind of what made me start looking at my own culture in general. And yeah, there were a lot of struggles in trying to shift the behavior, because at the end of the day, I'm Latina. I'm very proud to be Latina. I love being Latina. It's something that's so in my blood. It's so part of who I am, how I identify. As much as I loved it, though, having to sit there and look at my culture and realize the toxicity that was ingrained in it, it was very upsetting. I had to kind of grieve that for a bit, and it was very intense. And when it came to my own behaviors and starting to shift away from everything I had ever known, basically, the behaviors that kept me safe for 28 years of my life, having to look at them and be like, I can't do this anymore because it's not getting me to where I want to be. I had to grieve that as well. I had to grieve the person that I was to become, a healthier version of myself. And there was a period there of a few months where I just didn't know who I was anymore. I felt very disconnected from myself. Without these behaviors, I felt very exposed. Most of my behaviors, I realized, most of my unhealthy behaviors, I realized were like self-protection, like a lot of anger, a lot of like stonewalling, things like that, where you couldn't touch me, basically. That's what I wanted to give off. So without those behaviors that I thought had been protecting me for the majority of my life, I felt extremely exposed, super raw, super vulnerable. I didn't even know how to handle it. So I had to I went through a little bit of an identity crisis there. I didn't know how I felt about my culture anymore. There was a point where I felt like I didn't fit in with my family anymore, which was really hard. And I had to really work through that to get to the other side, but it definitely wasn't easy, that shift. So there definitely were a lot of struggles in that.
So I want to take a breath right here, because that was so powerful. Let me just breathe. I hope you guys are integrating everything that she's sharing, because that was such good stuff. And it's something that we don't really talk that much about at One Love. Yes, we're here to serve and educate everyone about healthy and unhealthy relationships, but I think that just as many people come to, avoid unhealthy relationships or get out of an unhealthy situation, there are also people who are the person doing the unhealthy behavior that come to us. And we don't really talk about that process, like what it must be like to wake up to the fact that you might be doing unhealthy things in a relationship. You might be the toxic energy in a room. And B, what does it mean to shift? Who are you when you strip away these behaviors, these learned behaviors that I think a lot of people have learned over time as a survival mechanism, or as just like an unconscious thing that they picked up from family and so on and so forth, like you're describing right now. I think there are some people who are just bad people and want to go around manipulating others, but I think the vast majority of us are just, and I say us on purpose because I'm guilty too, are just doing these unconscious behaviors. And it is a process to let them go, especially when you first come to One Love. So I just wanted to highlight everything you said, because that was such good stuff. If you are healing from unhealthy behaviors, let us tell you, we are with you on this one.
Yes.
It's a process.
Yes. We can only talk about it because we've lived it.
We've lived it.
That's just the truth of it.
Yeah. And something I love about One Love that makes us, I think, friendly to a lot of people is the fact that we talk about the fact that everyone is going to do unhealthy things. Like, it's impossible for us not to do unhealthy things.
Right.
Um, because no one has ever taught us how to love or to be in healthy relationships. So just
Hmm.
kudos to you for being so honest and intimate with us right now. I really appreciate this for sure.
Yeah, of course. Um, I think it's really important to, I'm willing to share this because my experience in the last year was really difficult for me. And honestly, I'm like, if I can have anyone avoid the lows that I was just at, I'll gladly put my ego in the trash and just be very imperfect
I
on
love that.
Instagram.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. Well, I did want to change um, the tone just a little bit.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about unhealthy behaviors, guys. Please bear with us. We are going to switch to healthy behaviors because there's a lot of beautiful things we take with us from our culture too, right? Especially the Hispanic culture. But it is
Hmm.
Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so I did want to sort of ground this conversation just a little bit in some important statistics we should know. And I want to get your reaction to it, Natasha. So really quickly, 34.4% of Hispanic women and 30% of Hispanic men in the US will experience sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. So relationship abuse. How do you feel when you hear those statistics, Natasha? And you guys can share
Um,
in the chat if you'd like.
yeah, definitely share your thoughts below. I mean, I hate that I'm not surprised by it, would probably be my first initial reaction. And I also think if we take into account the amount of undocumented pueblos that exist in Central and South America, um, I don't even know if these statistics are like, showing actually what it's like, because I'm sure there's a lot of undocumented violence that goes on with these smaller communities that are completely off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think that this is where my passion for mental health comes in. This for me is a lack of education. That's where it starts. I'm not saying there aren't people who will hear the education and then do whatever they want anyways. Those definitely exist, but I think the majority of it is just a lack of education. And I think tying back to One Love's mission, a lot of the reasons we even get into toxic relationships is a lack of education. The reason that we stay in them is also a lack of education. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of this can be avoided. And I think that now is the time that we need to start creating a movement specifically towards the Hispanic culture to educate more about mental health, what that means, what boundaries are, unhealthy versus healthy relationships. I mean, if I went through the list of unhealthy signs in a relationship that One Love gives, I experienced all of them just in my family alone. And I know that's not just me. So it's just more of a closed mindset, more functioning off of a survival mindset that I think needs to be shifted. And I think getting people the education that they need in order to have healthier relationships is going to be super vital there. I don't think everything's going to change, but I think it can help.
Yeah, 100%. And something else I wanted to kind of go back to is, earlier you talked about how your family unit actually influenced the way you see relationships and the trauma of having to flee a country, how that impacted them and therefore informed a lot of the things they taught you without meaning to, right? About
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And we talked a little bit about self-sacrifice, how that was like a huge value for you in relationships because of it. I'm wondering, based on some of the things you shared and the fact that you're not surprised for the relationship statistic, if you've ever experienced an unhealthy relationship and what you might like to share and, how you found the courage to leave.
Yeah, I think if I'm being honest, I think all of my romantic relationships were unhealthy. And I think with each one, as I grew up as a woman in age, with each relationship, it would get a little bit more serious because, of course, as you're growing, you're like, okay, is this someone that I want to spend life with or not? You start asking yourself more serious questions. So,
Yeah.
of course, the seriousness of the relationships grew. But if I'm being honest with myself, I'd have to say from the moment that I started getting involved in relationships to my last relationship, it just steadily, steadily, steadily grew unhealthier, unhealthier, unhealthier until the last one I really felt just like cracked me open. And as difficult as that was, I really needed to see everything that I wasn't dealing with. All of the things that were ingrained in my culture, all of the limiting beliefs that I had because of it, all of the unhealthy behaviors, all of the ways that I was co-creating
Yeah.
an unhealthy dynamic as well. So I definitely have been in an unhealthy relationship. I think, now moving forward is when I'm really focused on trying to shift that for myself. And so, yes.
Yeah.
And what was the second question?
How did you find the courage to leave?
Okay. This one is also like a two-part answer, I'd say, because I did get to a breaking point in my last relationship where, the dynamic had been toxic for a while. And there was a moment where I threatened to hurt myself. And that's literally the first time I say this out loud to anyone other than my therapist, but I think it's important. And I had this moment of, threatening to hurt myself. And then weirdly, the mirror was, right in front of me. And I looked at myself and I was like, I don't know who that is. So that moment for me was just kind of an enough moment. Like everything in my body just stopped.
Yeah.
And I hung up. I picked up the phone. I called my best friend. And for the first time in about a year, I was honest about how things were because no one knew. I was keeping it to myself because I was so ashamed of the state of my relationship and how I had let it go on and the fact that I was still in it. So I had that moment. And then the courage part of actually leaving that relationship, I honestly have to say that I found strength through other people in that moment. I didn't really have any left. I felt like I was running on empty. I was really disappointed in myself because I was acting so out of character. I just had no idea who I was. And my friends, my support system, my family, and they just lifted me. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. Which is why it's so important to find a healthy support system. I mean, I don't know, what would have happened if I didn't have them. So they just lifted me, and I'm a spiritual person also. I prayed a lot during that time. I prayed like my life depended on it. And so all of that, I would say, gave me the strength. I would use the word strength more than courage, maybe, because I didn't feel very brave doing what I was doing. But it gave me the strength to at least draw the line in the sand and be like, this is done and it's for the best for both of us. So I would say, yeah, that was a kind of a bizarre moment, but yeah.
Let's take another breath, right? You just shared
Yes.
something so intimate and so important. And it's so important to, I think a lot of people will watch this and feel seen, like, I felt that way in my relationship. So let's just breathe together, okay? Because that was really important and it was really heavy. And, you know, something I do want people to know watching this is that One Love does have incredible partners that we partner with and resources that we can provide you if you're in an unhealthy or an abusive relationship. Um, your relationship should not make you feel the way Natasha just described. So if you need some support, go to joinonelove.org, scroll down, click Get Help, and it will bring you to our real-time resources page where we have a ton of different support options for anyone who wants it and needs it. And yes, someone said, so brave, and thank you for sharing. I
Thank
agree.
you.
Hearts, lots of hearts. Thank you guys. Natasha is so brave and so incredible, and that's why I knew you had to come on and talk to us, of course.
If I could just add one thing to that as well,
Please.
because I do feel like, especially maybe anyone from a similar background might understand this. I was raised by the women in my family were, I just find them so strong, like the epitome of strength. And I always considered myself to be that as well. You and I have talked about this fallacy of invincibility, untouchability. I associated that with strength for so long, and I really tried to emanate that for myself. So the fact that I got to where I got to was not only very, I think the disappointment was so strong because I was so surprised by it. You know, I never thought that I could get to that level of bottom for myself. And the reason I say this is because I think a lot of people are functioning off of this fallacy. And I just want to say that asking for help is actually strength. And I think the moment that I might have been the strongest is when I finally let people in and I was like, help me because I don't know what else to do here. So that's what I wanted to add there. And I've really had to dismantle that idea of what a strong woman is and shift it to be a healthier strength, and one where I can respect myself.
Snaps. You're getting so many hearts. I think a lot of people relate to that, and certainly me as an African American woman definitely relate to this idea of strength equaling invincibility and never having to ask for help. That's not true. So I'm so glad we're just, as women of color, we're calling that out. It's not true. And so that brings me to my next question, actually. Let's talk about pop culture, right? Because, you know, pop culture has a huge impact on the way we perceive ourselves and the way that we perceive relationships. So I'm just wondering how media and music in the Hispanic community and in the American one, right? Latina American, hello, has influenced the way you experience relationships or perceive them. And also how you perceive your Latina-ness.
Yeah, I think pop culture is always an interesting topic because it's so complex, but so many people struggle with the same things. I mean, I will say the thing that's taking the world by storm right now is reggaeton. I love it to party. I like to dance to it. But if we look at the messaging, it's the men are treating women like objects, and the women, in order to protect themselves from this type of messaging, have to lean into like a toxic masculine energy so much that they start, this is the strong woman fallacy I was talking about. Like they start acting like they're invincible, they're untouchable. It doesn't matter what you do to me, nothing affects me. I'll do it right back. And in the process of it all, I think we just lose so much respect for ourselves as women. And we're not any closer to finding a healthy relationship. So I do think that the actual messaging of reggaeton music is an issue, especially if you're growing up. That's the part that worries me the most, is that adolescents internalize so much messaging that, you know, the guys might be learning how to treat women through reggaeton lyrics. Like they might be like, okay, it's very cool to be, you know, a toxic guy. Like that's how I get women. That's how I get laid. That's what makes women attracted to you. And then the women are there trying to act like they have no feelings. It's just not, it's not helping anyone. Um, so that's an issue I see. There's also in Miami, I've seen this a lot. There's like this trend of la tóxica and el tóxico, and like people wear shirts like saying that they're toxic, basically.
It's like
As
a good
more of
thing?
like, yeah, like
Oh,
because it's like a way to be spicy, I guess. I don't know. For me, it just looks like I'm like, please go to therapy, you know, I don't know. But I'm like, I don't know about this.
the
But yeah, so
honesty.
I think it's so ingrained. Everyone just, you know, there's this need to be cool and accepted and to have clout. And I think this is the easiest way people know how to do it because people are getting famous for these types of lyrics.
Yeah.
Um, so again, you know, I love reggaeton music, but we have to, you know, we have to be aware at least of like what we're actually digesting and what we're letting go.
A hundred
Um,
percent.
yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely see some parallels there between from what you're describing with like, hip hop music and culture and like what's the line between artistry and, harmfulness and I personally feel like a lot of the female rappers today are sort of mirroring like the energy that the misogyny that a lot of the men have, pushed and promoted through the culture. So I kind of
Exactly.
can see what you're saying there with the way women sort of take that on and how it influences the way you show up in general and in relationships, of course, for sure.
Hmm.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, something. Well, I did want to kind of segue, right? Because we've been focused a lot on unhealthy behaviors, but like I said earlier, we're not just here to bash our own cultures and the unhealthiness in it. We also want to talk about the healthy. But before I ask my next question, want to just call this out. Dr. Jocelyn Santana, hi girl, thank you for joining us. She says, so happy for you, Natasha. I am in my
Oh,
50s, Latina of Dominican descent, and it took me 50 years to learn the lessons you are learning. So proud of you and your example. Yes,
well,
thank you. Awesome.
that's powerful. Thank you so much.
I wanted to make sure I said
I'm
it.
glad you've learned, though. I'm glad we're
Yes,
all learning.
yes. And no one teaches us these things. So we're all on our
Yeah.
own journeys here. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. So I'm wondering what healthy relationship behaviors or values were reinforced by your culture or just your family in general.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have, like I said earlier, I'm very proud to be Latina. I love my culture. Um, and I think the most impressive one to me, especially now that I've um, created friendships outside of my own culture and dated people outside my own culture as well, is the fact that we're so community family oriented. I think that's so special. We make decisions. I mean, it has its balance too, like everything. But the fact that we take people into account before we make decisions, I think is really beautiful, and it demonstrates our love for each other. You know, like before I make any big decision of my life, I'm like, oh, but how is this going to affect my parents? And how is this going to affect my sister? And, you know, I don't let anything stop me from living my life, but it is nice to be so community oriented and loyal to family. And I know that at the end of the day, and this, of course, varies a lot, but at the end of the day, if no matter what happens, I'm like, I know I have them and that's it. Like that's the strength of the loyalty that we find in a lot of Hispanic families. We're like ride or die.
100%.
Um, I also think we are extremely warm. You know, when you're invited into a Hispanic's household, it's like the second your foot crosses the threshold, you are part of the family. Like, come in, eat, have a drink, let's talk. And you know, people care about you in that way. And I think that's really unique and super special. I mean, I've had the fortune of being able to travel a lot, and I've never felt warmth like I've felt in Latin American countries. Even being here when I moved to Buenos Aires, everyone has been so open to a foreigner. So that's really interesting. Um, and I also think we're extremely creative, which um, has it's interesting story as well. Specifically, I'll talk about salsa music as an example. In Cuba, when Castro took over and there was so much oppression and you couldn't speak, still basically can't, but you couldn't speak, you couldn't share your voice, you couldn't have an opinion. People went to music in order to share a message, in order to make themselves feel better, in order to spread positivity. I think the Latin culture as a whole, we've been through a lot, and we're very positive when it comes down to it because we're very spiritual and we have faith at the end of the day that it gets better. I don't think you'll meet someone of Hispanic origin who doesn't have that little uplifting note at the end when life gets hard. Like, no, but you'll see that it'll work out. And there's so many sayings about this, but one of them is the only thing in life that doesn't have a solution is death. And that's how we think. We're like, don't worry, it's gonna get figured out. And I think the power of music has been one of the ways that we've expressed ourselves. The power of art, of course. But yeah, we're a colorful, vibrant community. And it's super interesting to see the distinctions between each country as well. But at the end of the day, we all come together as one. So yes,
I
love being Latina.
Beautiful group. What'd you say?
I love being Latina is how I ended that.
Nice, nice, nice. Awesome. I'm so glad people are loving this conversation. My last question, what piece of relationship advice amongst the many truth bombs you've already shared would you share with our audience right now?
I think the message I always come back to for myself is it starts with you. Every moment of my life, I've always come back to that. Okay, but it starts with me, and how do I do this for myself so that I can share it with others? So I would say, in terms of relationship advice, it's really get to know yourself. Try to educate yourself as much as possible. Start with one love. If you're trying to figure out what the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships is, you know, I think that's why One Love is such a great resource. It just simplifies it so much. So yeah, educate yourself, get to know yourself. That means get to know your values, get to know what your needs are from someone and of yourself. Deal with your stuff because no one's going to do it for you. That's the truth of it at the end of the day. And yeah, just learn how to be your own ally, learn how to be your best friend, your partner, your own savior. Stop waiting for other people to come and fix everything for you. Show yourself love, compassion, patience. I've had to learn. Forgiveness has been a big one for me. Learning to forgive myself, still learning. But yeah, sit with yourself, educate yourself. Those would be my two. Know yourself, educate yourself.
The amount of empowerment and ownership and personal responsibility that you just ooze is like so inspiring. Like I cannot take it. I'm with Jocelyn where I'm just like in awe. I'm like, ooh, I'm still learning. Girl, teach me.
Yes. It's a journey.
So yes.
It's a journey.
And I love
I would like to say
yeah.
I wrote this little quote here because I wanted to share it at the end. One of my favorite resources is a relationship coach one of my friends introduced me to. Her name's Jillian Turecki. Everyone go look at her Instagram. She's incredible. And she has this quote that she says pretty frequently, which is the road to relationship hell is paved with charming people who have not worked on themselves. And I think it's so true. In order to have a healthy relationship, we need to look at ourselves, we need to look at our cultures, and we need to decide for ourselves who we want to be and how to make the shift towards healthier behaviors.
Awesome.
Starts with you.
It starts with you. I am going to end it on that. Thank you so much, Natasha, for joining me once again.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. She's a contributor to our blog at joinonelove.org. So if you want to read some of her writing, please go to our blog and check her out on the Learn page. And something else I just wanted to reiterate, because we did talk quite a bit about unhealthy behaviors and relationship abuses, that if you're in an unhealthy relationship, you can get help. Help is out there for everyone. And One Love has some incredible partners on our Get Help page that you can find when you go to joinonelove.org. /get help, or go to our homepage, scroll down, click Get Help, and you'll see our resources. Another incredible partner that I wanted to call out is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Always an incredible resource. Their number is 1-800-799-7233. So that's 1-800-799-7233. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.